9:30 on November 30th. I look to a meeting of the BPW Mitigation Committee. All the committee members are here, as well as our general manager and assistant general manager and our administrative assistant. First thing, revisions and deletions to the agenda. Move on. Approval of the August 31st and November 5th minutes. Anybody have any comments, or is there a motion?
I move that they be accepted as presented.
These are not the October.
These are, I was asking for both, if there's one that,
Well, I got one just addition to the October.
I think they both were sent out. So if you want us to hold approving that one until you get a chance to read it.
I read it.
Did you say you didn't get one?
No, I got it. I have an addition to the October minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
What was the addition?
What would you
He
like?
wants
He
to-
wants to add an.
Oh,
amendment.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
There-
I thought you said you had one. Okay.
at one point I said. Top of page 2.
Yeah.
I questioned the cost. And I guessed at $250,000. Okay. And Austin, what's not in there is Austin sort of corrected me and said I was way off. It would be more like $2 million. So.
If you wanna, what we'll do is, if you wanna share them with us, then Sharon can correct it in the minutes.
Yep.
And we can either circulate them back at the next meeting, or you can approve them without
Yeah,
addition.
we'll just approve them with that addition.
That's
That's all right.
simple enough, just.
Okay,
Okay, sorry, I wasn't with you. Do we have, I think we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor? Before we get into our meeting, agenda items, we have a meeting tonight, because we received the long-awaited long-range plan for BPW. It's online. So tonight will just be, the board will be officially accepting it and not approving it, just accepting it and setting a date for a workshop for the public to provide it. But we won't be taking it tonight, we'll have that at the future workshop. This will just be the board saying, okay, let's go forward with the workshop. So and then after the workshop, we'll have one of our next meetings. If everything's okay, it'll be approved or modified at that point. So
And just in addition, GHC will be doing the presentation to the board tonight. So the company that did the report,
what time is that?
4:00.
we have an executive session at 3, so don't get there at 3, get there at 4. But it's I think it's a well done, very detailed, a lot of data, a lot of information backing up conclusions and so forth. So it's 140 pages. So
I just wish it was a little longer.
Where is the meeting?
here in the council chambers.
And then what we'll do is, once that meeting date's set, we'll do similar to what we did back in April, which is or March or April. We'll circulate a letter to all residents, customers, so that everybody's aware that this is happening, and we'll probably set the meeting either at trying to find a space that's large enough, whether it be the Rollins Center, we try the library or something like that.
We'll be sending out, like we did the last time, postcards to all of our clients, all of ratepayers. So everybody's they can't say they didn't know about it. We're trying to get the word out. I'm sure we'll be publicized in Gazette. So we're trying to really get as much input as we can about this.
And since this was jointly funded between us and the county, we're going to hear it at our meeting next week. The board will vote on the next meeting or formally hear it. And then the council, this week, the county council is going to hear it next Tuesday.
This is report what they think is, or I should say, they're not really making a recommendation. They guess they're not to make a recommendation, but they tell you what seems to be the best choice going forward as far as costs and public acceptance, and environment, all the issues involved. So they don't make a firm conclusion as such when they ask them not to do that. But then we want the public would give their input because they're going to have other ideas about something, for sure. So, but I think it's well done. I think it's well supported. Something that someone's been pushing for a while.
Can I ask a
Sure,
question?
go ahead.
So when this plan is presented and then you have a public hearing and then it comes back and then your board's going to approve it.
Well, we'll be maybe they'll approve it, maybe they'll
Well,
ask for revisions or something.
what's the next step? Does it go to the city council or does it come straight from here without the city council? So the Board of Public Works makes their autonomous decision
And the
without
county,
city
the county
council.
has to make their decision.
And the county has to agree or make their changes or whatever. So it's between the Board of Public Works and Suffolk County, period.
Potentially between the Board of Public Works and county.
Yeah.
Because there are options that have us going on our own.
Yeah,
So,
I understand.
if it's a joint project, it would be with the county. If it's BPW on its own, it's ours.
So the county could reject it and then BPW could approve it.
Correct.
Okay, without the city council. Good,
Correct.
got it.
We don't play.
That means we're interested to hear what they have to say about it, obviously.
You're not important, I just want to understand the process.
So I just want to make sure everybody was aware of that. I think it's a well done report, so hopefully everybody will take the time to digest it and see if they can provide input.
Is that input needed before the 4 o'clock meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not accepting any input. Okay, first, item 5. Robin, Robin did most of the work putting this together. Do you go over it?
Well, what we have is, I took the asset listing that we had originally. That just basically had all the pump stations, the wastewater plant, stuff like that in general locations. And the floodplain designation and added it, XY points, longitude, latitude. And some little columns that reference to items might have different things like the lift stations. Have the cabinets, maybe the generators and things like that. And we were gonna have Josh, our IT manager, him and Mike go out and shoot actual elevations of those cabinets, the bottom of the cabinets, the bottom of the generators and things like that. That's what the column in here of existing elevations. Currently, I just put examples on there only. This can be manipulated any way you want. And then I added a comment section in there. Just in general terms, what I did is like on one of those, the grinder pump 6, which is at number 25, it's no longer in operation. So I just put in there, it's no longer in operation, abandoned. That's some of the comments we can put in. That pertains just to generally to that lift station or to the plant. It's like pump station 4, which is at Savannah Road and Gills Neck. It's got a split designation for floodplain. Some of the properties in X, some of it's in an AE6. But looking at the map, all the structures on the property are outside the flood zone. So there's a balance between sometimes you have that. You're gonna have a split flood zone designation on some of those properties. So it's good to know whether some of that structure is in or some of it's out. Does it make any difference whether it's gonna flood or not? No. So it's just, this is just a start of something more to get the X and Y points and the longitude latitudes. Eventually, these columns with all the relevant equipment that's at that station or at that plant can be put on the document showing what the elevations are.
Okay, I got a dumb question.
Okay.
What are the X and Y points? What do they stand for?
I probably should, because this came from Josh.
It's probably like
latitude and
state
longitude.
plane, XY coordinates from the GIS.
It's more from the GIS side of it.
Yeah, I would imagine it's GIS coordinates that are based on some map projection. It's usually state plane. I don't know what you guys are using.
And we can, this. It's kind of long, we're gonna add to it actually, because as I mentioned, if you want to put on there. Dates when we feel that we should be updated. But we had a simplified. Plan the last time, that shows, you know, the assets. And when. We're recommending they be upgraded, so. Like we'll have an installation, obviously, like new, maybe built to the newer standard. Any major renovations, maybe renovated to standards. And you don't fall in those categories. We were thinking, you know, we'd have an intermediate date, like 2030 to upgrade by the ones maybe. In the most serious, like, the AEs, 6 and 7s on the FEMA flood maps. And then anything higher than that, say 8 or above, they would be 2035. That'd give you protection initially as the sea level rise continues at 2030 for the most critical ones. And for the least critical ones, maybe a few more years getting up to speed. Unless there were some particular circumstances about a particular asset that we feel it should be sooner than the FDA designation. I think that's probably the way we want to run with.
Yeah, because once Josh gives us more information on the actual elevations of that.
Yeah.
Equipment at that facility, I think that'll help determine, okay, if you've got something that's automatically ground level, that's way below what our numbers are, then that's more critical to get it fixed,
Yeah.
to get it taken care of, than it would be if something's already well above the numbers, but having those numbers would help determine where do you want to go first.
And Sumner, I think I heard you had a thought about.
Well, I promise I'm gonna talk less. I sent a question to Austin, basically asking for what Robin just said. What's his name?
Josh,
Josh is gonna do, which is, I'm assuming, get the bottom elevation of the critical components that are in each of these things, because frankly, the AE thing doesn't matter unless you start to put elevations with that, right? Just like you said with pump station 4. It's on a slope.
Yeah.
Some of it's in, some of it's not, but what, you guys have talked about things that are buried at some depth under the ground. Those are the things that really matter. So, no, that was all, just how you get at the actual elevations that matter in terms of vulnerability.
So
That's what's needed to add
Yeah.
to this, so we have a plan going forward.
correct.
And for convenience, we could hide like the XY numbers on the spreadsheet for general distribution, but still have it for ourselves.
But I will say one other thing was, because I don't know the nature of the vulnerability of the assets themselves, but where access is important, it might be valuable to have the actual land surface elevation, and so on.
So the other thing we're using this for is right now, the way that the cash reserve policy is set up is that we self-insure for pollution and flood. And one of the things we started to entertain was, what does a policy for flood and pollution look like instead of self-insuring for $1 million? So one of the things is we're looking at getting a proposal for pollution. And we started taking a look at assets that are in the floodplain, either AE and or X. That comes in the comment that you had made about where is the critical elevation, that plays into this, but we're utilizing the same information to get a proposal on that. And then we've kind of discussed it on parametric, which is a new type of insurance where you can insure an event. Could be a flooding event, could be a hurricane, and they use something similar to where they put thresholds in. You basically, you can use variable things like tidal gauges, and then you can also put, you can affix gauges on the side of buildings. Once the threshold hits that, then it's automatic payout from an insurance side. It's not a cheap policy, but it's becoming more and more prevalent because to hold, one is if you come up and you evaluate these assets at $45 million, to come back and say you need to have a reserve policy that has $45 million in the bank when you're a not-for-profit organization just isn't realistic. So some people will actually go out and hold these insurance policies that have a 1%, 1.5% premium, so that it sits there, especially those that are down on the coast. And what happened on the most recent hurricane, if they're instant payouts, I mean, they said the quickest payout they've ever had is 8 hours. And you're talking about payouts that could, and it funds not only your assets, but it also funds your revenue streams. So if you lose, let's just say, and in the worst case scenario, if you lose the beachside community because of a huge hurricane, you can actually fund your revenue that's lost because of that, because that is a loss. So the insurance world is interesting, and this kind of all plays into that.
Just because I did read all the things I said on the. I just heard an opportunity to fund some of that real-time water level gauging that we were talking about in October. And it seems to me it's a perfect way to
We
explore
asked.
a way to do what you just said.
We
It
asked.
may
the
not
insurance
be buildings, it might be a little lower than particular building, but it would definitely inform the buildings. Something that isn't the thing out on the KMA, Ferry
Correct.
dock, because that's not really representing what's going on anymore.
Correct.
Is the city aware of this insurance and have you discussed with them?
We haven't, we've only had one conversation about it because it's new. Even our insurance carrier wasn't fully kind of embraced in it. But after after we sat down and actually had the presentation from HMS, it kind of opened our eyes. And then it's not there. You have to take it with a grain of salt because on how you fund it, you're talking about a 1% to 2%, 1.5% premium. If you're insuring $16 million worth of assets or $20 million or $40 million, that goes up. I mean, it's a risk, but it's whether or not you want to hold individual policies that fund a little piece of it, or do you fund an event? And we kind of went through and said, we talked about the flooding events because Press, you had made a great point, is that on paper, one flood event said it was the highest in history, but in the actual reality, it was highest at that one point in time out at the tidal gauge.
The village.
So we had actually talked, and then this goes into the discussions with DelDOT, because access becomes a problem. So DelDOT is a player at this. So do you approach DelDOT or do you approach DENREC and say, hey, look, we all can benefit from this, and we put in and we put in additional flood gauges.
To the Florida, what happened in Florida?
Yeah.
I think we talked about this before, but sea level rise, as the sea rises, the frequency of these flood events will increase as well. And so I don't know how you factor in, you get close, but you get close 3 times in 1 year rather than once every 10
But
years.
that's gonna be a gradual thing over the years.
We
The
hope.
insurance company will pick that up.
Yeah, we hope.
It's a very, Robin and I sat through it, and it's a very interesting insurance policy because it covers a lot, but you're creating, based off data, you're creating these events. So if you're saying flood hits this, as soon as it hits it, it's payout. It's not, oh, what's your damage? It's you hit it, it's paid out.
So you're saying you could basically determine those elevations once you get all these points in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Back to the
go ahead.
chart for just a second.
Mhm.
Okay. Looking at it, I'd say great work, and you're gonna add a little bit. But I don't have any real clue as to what's important on there. I mean, is grinder number 3 or Highland Acres more important or more likely to cause a huge problem? So as you're redoing the chart, presumably for the next time, some kind of these are critical.
Well, like, I'm assuming there's a,
These are, relate to a neighborhood, not terribly important. We could do without.
there's a flow rate
Drake
that's
Knoll.
associated with those, right? All the pump stations. Like a 4, I understand, takes a huge percentage of the.
Well,
It's
maybe it's how much flow goes through past
Yeah,
that
maybe
point
that's
or
how
not,
I read it.
or to use an actual number, but I mean, I don't know whether line 29 is more important than line 11.
That's a really good point because like the grinder pumps, they're individual houses for the most part. That's a single, so that's the importance is lowest, I think, versus pumping station 4, which takes everything this side of the canal. So.
I mean, you all know how this,
Very
how
good
this
rating,
stuff
yeah.
works and,
Yeah.
and I mean, it drains to here and then this happens.
Mhm.
If that goes out, is that important
Right.
in the short term or, you know, only localized?
Yeah, we could have a ranking or a different color for red for the most important and the yellow for each one. That's a very good point. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
curious,
this spreadsheet can be changed anyway. Again, this is just kind of like the beginning.
And you
We
can
got the,
bring them various versions of it.
Correct.
Anyone who knows.
correct. Yeah, it's whatever the committee members would like to see on here. We can add, take away and change it around and.
They can put it on the GIS system.
In your thinking about this insurance, does the cost of the insurance, is it anywhere near the prorated cost of a loan to harden that piece of equipment so that it doesn't need insurance? You follow what I mean?
You make an interesting. I know what you're saying because you look at the debt service on taking out a loan to harden versus the debt, versus the premium that you
Right.
pay
And-
to fund that risk.
And still may have costs if the premium has to be paid, you still would have some further
Yeah.
costs.
Well,
And I don't know if there's some kind of
our
ranking.
financial people, we said we're turning this over to the finance committee now,
Okay.
and we've got some really good.
Certainly better
people-
than, certainly better than.
Strong people in that
Fine.
committee. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just wondering if ranking of these, if that should be considered in some way in the ranking also. I don't know how to make it fit actually, but I don't know, just throw it out there.
You're probably still gonna need insurance no matter what, though, because, I mean, if you decided that, you wanted to harden it 1 foot higher than X point. What happens if the storm is 1.1 feet times higher? So you still have to,
Yeah.
and, with the way the storms are hitting now, picking a point to harden to that's gonna give you, 99% reliability.
I was just looking in this report that we just got, and there were all of those numbers and then figured on top of that. So I didn't know if there was something.
But really, we have discussed this, and
Okay.
we have turned this over to the finance committee. And they're looking at things like that, hopefully, they're a pretty smart committee, so hopefully they'll be.
And if all hell breaks loose and something really bad happens and whether you've hardened it or not and requires something to be repaired after the big storm. Well, doesn't FEMA come in and?
Yeah, but you're not gonna get FEMA.
Yeah, you're not
payments
getting paid
until
now.
a year to 2 years after the event.
Okay,
That's what the payout period is paid. There's a recent ones. So-
They show up with signs.
So,
That's expensive.
the general
What they write.
industry statement is you have to go it alone. And
But do they help with, you go it alone, will they come back and help you with the funding of your going it alone?
And if you go it alone, you have to make sure you've complied with everything that
Yeah,
FEMA is gonna require down the line. Because there's actually a couple of big court cases right now where FEMA has disallowed 2 years after the fact. Because
They didn't do
the
it
I's
their way.
weren't dotted and the T's weren't crossed. I think it was they missed the time frame by a couple of days on a submission. And, it's just the administrative bureaucracy and to make sure that you're going to get repaid is really, really risky.
The other thing that we did is we sat with the University of Delaware, offered a kind of a class to help with grant writing for federal grants. And so Kim and myself and Robin, I believe, attended and we went through and actually listened and we kind of presented some of the initial projects. This was back in October. And they had kind of discussed, well, as they become or start to come to fruition, it's like there's a need there and you're gonna put for it. They would assist and help with that. So that's another kind of avenue, because grant writing, I mean, it's an art.
But what I'm saying, when I asked about the city, our next step is to meet with the city, probably also myself. Sitting down with the mayor and city manager, to bring up to speed on what this committee is come to. And ask them to kind of fill in the things that they need to fill in, or at least give us guidance if they can at that point. So, I'm sure we're not getting what we're looking for, because they've tried to do that themselves in the past and haven't been able to get there.
Building on Mark's question. Robin, Austin. Are there relationships between lines on this spreadsheet? That are important to keep track of, you know? When 10 fails, it's like a domino thing with other things down the line or up the line, whatever, you understand what I'm saying?
So that's exactly what happened back in August 15th, when we had the failure at 4. Because what we did is when we were pumping from 4 and 3, because most of all the flow from the Pilot Town Village side of town goes to 3, which then gets pumped from 3 to 4. So we were essentially trying to level the system out by pumping from 4 and 3, knowing that there is a little bit of gravity that comes in and goes down past the Inlet Canal Square. But there is. If you lose 4 and 8, you got a problem.
So is there value in somehow capturing some of those interdependencies?
Yeah,
Here?
we have an entire flow diagram that
Okay.
shows where each pump station pumps to. So that's not a difficult thing to take care of.
And maybe it's reflected in that color scheme that Russ was talking about, whatever, it just gets to the way you rank them.
Yeah.
All right, well, and that's kind of where, that's one of our largest goals is to put this together. And, so,
I just spoke with Josh before this, and Josh said hopefully by our next meeting, he'll be able to have the elevation numbers for the cabinets generation, stuff like that.
no, good.
So they can be put in this document, and then we can take a look at that and kind of make a step forwards and maybe start color coding these things to prioritize what's more critical than others.
All right, good. Yeah,
Can I say?
sure.
You know, they say that any operation or piece of equipment is only as good as its weakest link. And in part of this elevation analysis, I believe the sludge bins are below the floodplain, the base level of the floodplain of the sludge bin. And I don't know if it's identified or not, and I haven't read
This
the long range plan yet.
this report doesn't address the treatment plant. This long range,
Okay,
that does.
okay, so it's treatment plant, but not what you're doing, not this part here,
Yeah,
this elevation
Yeah,
part.
this is everything but the treatment plant.
Okay,
This is
sorry,
every asset we have
okay.
except the treatment plant. This is, we're looking at that report.
But
That goes into it in detail.
there is a section in the report. that says-
In the long range plan.
It looks about, it talks about all the elevations
Okay.
inside the plan
Okay.
and what's needed for each aspect of itself.
But one of the options, hard,
Yeah, Harding.
and they had to say, you know, what the issues were and stuff. That's all in this stuff.
Okay.
This is the read.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll turn it.
Say the truth, don't print it.
Yeah, it's one more comment, because like what Bob said, I don't know what 11 California Avenue is. If there's an address, that just means it's a pump station. Is that what that is?
Some of them have addresses, some of them don't have addresses. So like, or,
But is there a way of labeling in terms of what the equipment is?
yeah, we can go down through the
Well,
label.
Anything usually with a number is a pump station or a lift station. So all 1 through, well, it's still on the screen is 32.
That's on Lewes Beach, isn't it? 11 California.
Yeah.
California.
It's the one that's
On the
always,
corner.
yeah.
So because then, once you get down past the numbers, they say there's the wastewater plant.
Okay, so those are all pump stations.
Correct.
All of
I
those-
can put that on there. I can write pump station on there. one pump station to identify what it is, yeah.
All right, there's no more discussion of that item. We'll go to item 6. And Barbara, I'll throw this into your lap since you did a great job reviewing the treatment plans, emergency plan, and you had some comments that I think
Yeah,
you can point out more.
I just, you know, I know that I assume that this was prepared by the company that runs the wastewater treatment plant. And I assume they run other wastewater treatment plants and that they've got basically a generic plan that was somewhat refined for this one, but it's just, you know, one of the big things I notice is that they really don't mention the marsh or the canal and the kind of emergencies or emergency response that might protect those assets and the sensitivity of them. And then the specific comments I made were just, you know, it was, I don't know whether it needs to be discussed by our group or whether it should be passed on to, is it Infomark? Yeah. Whether it should be passed on to them and suggest that, you know, you need to update
why-
this.
You will obviously have to go back to Infomark and, you know, talk to them back. Maybe you can just read through the one and just kind of, so we understand what the sense of it is, and we don't have to get into the details of
Yeah.
rewording.
You know, there is in section 3 a description of the emergency alarm system. And it doesn't really describe what the alarm,
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an add data or
Yeah.
information here.
yeah, right.
Everything out.
It's been a while since I looked at this, but in section 5, which is the emergency evacuation procedures, it calls for the workers to meet in the break room before they evacuate. And that might not always be such a, I don't know where the break room is, but it might not be such a smart idea. I think an outdoor location might be a better place.
Yeah, that's usually something written in there to say, let's get a head count.
Yeah, right. Right, you
Yeah,
need
but
the
they
head
usually-
count.
Yeah,
but-
there usually is an assembly point and an alternative assembly point though.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
Right. Oh, okay. It's up there now. And of course, you know, if it's a flooding situation, you're not gonna wanna move your cars to American Legion Road, you're gonna wanna move them somewhere else. Where it's a little bit higher. And a glaring thing is that the team members for the emergency team, the names weren't filled in. Was those kinds of things, you know. And then in section 12, reactions to severe weather conditions. It talks about covering openings with plywood. And maybe that'll work, maybe it won't, but do we have plywood in stock? Enough of it, you know, are there other supplies that would maybe work better in some situations? Do we have them? In case of loss of power, are we confident that the critical systems are connected to the emergency power supply? It doesn't really address that. In a flooding situation, of course, you need to shut off the power, but what are the implications of shutting off power to a treatment plant? Does that also include the power to the pump stations? And therefore is inflow into the wastewater treatment plant stopped? And if it's stopped, is there a way to notify residents that, your systems are gonna back up? Yeah. And that's a coordination with the city kind of issue, probably.
I thought it was my eyes.
Look at,
Yeah.
all right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and if you have an overflow issue, do we have something like frac tanks that are easily available? Do we have contracts for getting someplace to store excess wastewater coming in? And then I think, this is just maybe a silly one. Do we have access to a rescue boat if we need it?
Yeah, Earl Webb.
He just pulled it. Yeah, no, it's
Put it
not
back
there
in.
anymore.
We have the keys.
Yeah, but you're right. That's like the only way to get out there.
Yeah, yeah.
So just to hit on on the overflow, we have a clarifier that's in the center, the old clarifier that we use as an overflow to kind of fight any sort of headroom issues that we have. And then on the generator cycles through every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on all facilities. So it kicks off major power, kicks the generator on, generator runs for an allotted amount of time, and then it kicks back off to ensure that everything is connected in and you have no issues. Just as a couple things.
Good. The reaction to bomb threats. I don't know how these kinds of things work. But I thought a checklist is certainly a good idea. But what about tracing calls? Is that possible these days? That
It's through the police department, and I mean, we can't do it.
yeah.
Although nowadays, you probably call up any local hacker and they can do it.
Yeah, right.
Sharon can do it.
No, I'm working that job.
We've got kids under 9.
Hey, that-
That'll be.
And if the caller is stupid enough to have not inactivated caller ID, you would want to a space on that form to write down the caller ID. Simple kind of thing. And what if the threat is by text? Does that call for a different response, or was that considered? I mean, I'm not an expert in that kind of thing.
I guess the police department's probably up on that. Hopefully they'd be up on that. They could be.
And maybe they could give some advice.
That's a good question.
Josh can track a good amount of information through the phones, through web, and so whatever he gets, he'll probably turn over to the police. I would assume.
But this would be threats only to wastewater treatment plant employees, which are subcontractors or contractors.
So we still control the PBX system for the wastewater treatment.
Not if they receive a text on their personal phone. Or phone call from the Infomart phones, not from BPW phone system.
Reaction to severe work accidents. You can tell that this is an Infomart policy. Don't talk to anybody except for us. And it might be that you need to talk to the people in the hospital, and you need to talk to the police and other people within the BPW if they're not included with the definition of company. So that might not be something that the DPW endorses as a policy. And then it's not designated who notifies the victim's family in case of an emergency incident. And for all emergencies, it's a good idea to have a designated media contact and someone who can
Who's
respond
authorized to speak?
Yeah, yes. And who maybe
That
is
would-
Technically, it's Tom, unless Tom designates it to anybody else.
Well, actually, if they're Infomart employees,
That's, yeah, that's
it's Infomart. Because, I mean, they have the employee responsibility. And I don't talk good.
Okay, and the other thing, emergency contacts, they've got the old mayor, they've got a lot of people who are no longer
I
there.
noticed that.
Yeah,
It seems like Barbara has pointed out a whole bunch of things that these pages need to go back
Yes.
through, updated and probably checked going forward periodically, once a year or something, to make sure that you do have the current information, telephone number.
Yeah, the other thing, that I see these emergency contacts are at offices. They should have a cell phone of the
Yes.
individual too.
And
definitely.
just in general, I mean. We've actually pushed back on Infomart, but we've got other issues right now. And as soon as those get cleared up. This. Because this has been. An outstanding issue, not to the level degree that you've gone into, but. That this was never quite up to snuff.
Yeah.
And that's on us. I mean, that's.
And I think Mark brought up with the last one, what about the chlorine emergency plan? Is that
I think there is a chlorine, isn't there a separate chlorine emergency plan? Because it should be here too.
I think
Seems
there
to me
is.
that, even at the, like at the water plant, I'm more familiar with, I think there's literature right there too about if there's a problem. But I think there is a separate, I don't know where it would be exactly.
The only thing is the water plant's a little bit different because we're running chlorine gas instead of hypochlorite.
At the water plant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do we have any hypochlorite at the treatment plant? We've got the.
Yeah, we do
Where is that?
in tanks.
Where do you use it?
Hold on, maybe I'm messing it up with caustic.
No, yeah, I don't think there's any chlorine up there.
No, I think it's caustic.
We have all the violet or disinfectant.
Yeah, we only disinfect it with UV.
Barbara, they were excellent and they will be passed on to Infomark. We may, as the president pointed out, we may be delaying until we get some other things, but we're very close to resolving other issues with them right now. So hopefully, we can address these also. But they're very good, thank you. Okay, the last thing is, this was on the agenda for the last meeting, we didn't quite get to it, and that's on the environmental programs and policies that we would encourage BPW to implement or support.
I don't know.
The computer system doesn't seem to be cooperating today.
No, doesn't like that.
I have a question about the second grouping. We've had several conversations about various, future initiatives and so on, and some of them kind of fit in here. What's the BPW's feeling about induction cooktops and things like that? And sort of there seem to be a number of municipalities that are working to electrify the domestic appliances and get away from petroleum, fossil fuel based things. I don't know if that's if that's an issue for the electrical supply here. I don't know if it makes a difference at all.
I think it's I know it's an initiative of the electric industry, electrifying cars.
But I think we.
I'm talking more about like
Capacity.
Yeah.
cooktops and heat pumps and things like that.
It is an issue relative to, I mean, especially with things like heat pumps, converting from oil fired, natural gas fired to heat pumps. Well, it's the right thing to do environmentally and everything else. It adds a load to the grid. We did have a Sergeant Lundy do, a load study. They took into account the standard grid growth or programs. And one of the things that came out was that in Lewes, because a lot of the construction has been new or renovated, already have heat pumps, geothermal, whatever. And the percentage of oil burning and natural gas burning as a percentage of the entire town load is actually not that significant as opposed to, other communities. But things like EVs, that's the big one. Especially if the boats pull in and try to charge. So it's something we're monitoring going forward. Right now, we have capacity. But that's not to say that, in 5 years, after things start to get adopted. And in Tom Panetta's personal opinion, California and Washington State and them have gone off the deep end. It's great to strive for 2035 all electric, but they've done nothing to support their grid or their generation. And so they've got two, laissez-faire and mandated requirements at the same time.
But nationally, that's the problem. I mean,
Yeah.
Our entire grid system's not set up, or doesn't have the capacity for everything we're pushing.
And then that's why I asked the question. I
Yeah,
just,
That's not just a local problem.
yeah,
It's not a California problem. It's not.
No, but they're the ones,
I know.
yeah, they're the ones who put in
Totally,
the deadline. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
The canary in the coal mine.
Now there is funding in, the latest bills to help reinforce the grid. But whether that's gonna be adequate or not, and whether it's gonna be timely or not, is the question.
we're at the, as I understand it, at the end of the line.
Or at the end of a single line.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, The Economist magazine says it's about 25%. If everybody stopped using the gas vehicle and started using electric, it's about 25%
25% of growth.
on the
The overall, yeah.
I have a little more basic question about converting to all electric. What is the source of our electricity here in terms of coal, oil fired, whatever?
What's our percentage? We have.
I have the entire percentage where we meet and exceed what the state of Delaware mandates for through the Public Service Commission. So we have a little bit of wind up in Laurel Hill, PA. We have generation from a natural gas plant in Fremont, Ohio. We have solar. We have over 1.2 megawatts of solar installed behind the meter right now. And then we have the windmill from the UD, which is, I believe, 2 megawatts. And then we have a couple solar projects throughout the state that are tied in with DMEG.
However, I will add the negative side, which is Delaware.
Yeah.
Is behind every one of our surrounding states on renewable energy requirements. And
And planning. Because
and
they,
playing.
because the
So-
NRG plant that's getting shut down is now everybody's paying for that.
Right.
So they're gonna be getting it quickly. They're gonna be figuring it out. They're gonna have to.
Who?
Delaware. I mean, if you're talking about NRG shutting down
New?
plant,
It's a very unique situation there because essentially, all those that are affected by that plant are paying for that plant to stay online until the transmission lines are built. So that's 300, about from a yearly perspective, you're talking 350 plus over the 350 million over the course of the next 5 years. And that's assuming that those transmission lines are built, which everybody in this room can probably assume that that
Well,
won't happen. in
it's
5
just one
years.
correction to the terminology. The plant isn't staying online. The
Yeah.
plant is going to cold shutdown. And we're paying to maintain it in case of an emergency that it potentially could be brought back
If
online
it gets cold.
within like 2 days. So,
have this image of this big building rattling into life again.
oh, have you ever been inside of a coal plant when you're heating it up? Rattling is an understatement. So you can contact your state legislatures and your national legislators and Austin's last point is that, and this is all predicated that within the next 5 years, 5 additional transmission lines will be built from various places to take over. Now, there is money in the new bill to convert coal plants to hydrogen generation and small modular reactors. Now, I don't think the NRG site probably would ever wind up with an SMR, but you know, there is money there for conversions or even solar. Because the sites tend to be quite large and they can, you know, there have been several cases where they've already put in solar fields in place of the coal plants. Now, we'll see how our legislative branches actually follow through.
Do you feel better now?
For the record, no.
And one of the things at the next board meeting that we're gonna be talking about is the new net metering legislation and what the board is gonna be doing as far as, because we follow the state's legislation. With the new legislation, it's basically increased the amount of net metering that you would allow on your system, but at the same time, it takes away any overages. So the way that it works is you build to 110% of your average consumption. The state came back and said, if you raise from 5% to 7% or 8%, I can't remember off the top of my head. You don't have to pay out for that extra 10% in the grand scheme of things that you would have at the end of the year, because it's a rolling average. So let's just say at the end of the year, you had 5,000 kWh that you had as a credit. Well, in previous years, you would pay out for that credit at the supply service rate, which is calculated off your bills that you send out over the course of 12 months. Now you don't have to do that. The state took that completely out. You don't have to reimburse that, is assumed by the utility company, which is different than what it is before. So that comes down to a policy discussion, which we'll discuss that at our next board meeting.
Is there value at some point in having more storage at the household level?
Yes.
It's, and there are, and Tom brings up, and you bring up a great point, is that there are utility companies in the Northeast, in the Midwest, that are actually doing programs where they're subsidizing the installation of batteries at houses at higher than what a normal higher than normal consumption would be. Like if you have an EV charging station or charging in your house for a Tesla, is that they're actually putting them in there so that it can charge when you're paying the least amount of power, so that you can charge your vehicle with that battery storage.
Now, most of them are doing it where that's tied. It's got to be charged through renewable energy.
Yeah.
There are a couple of outliers who are saying, well, that's not fair, and that they're allowing you to charge off of, you know, bunker C.
You're saying putting a battery pack in my garage and just putting grid power on,
Right.
and putting in the battery.
That is in general not the way most of the programs are going. But there are some programs in some states which have decided from an equity perspective that they do. Now, it's still better than burning fuel in your house because the plants are more efficient and have more scrubbing as opposed to, but it's not ideal.
I remember reading years ago about fuel cells as a source for community power. You know, could power maybe 20 or 50 homes or something, and locally based fuel cell. Has anyone read anything about that?
Actually, they installed General Electric installed the first prototype system on Long Island at the old Pilgrim State Hospital. It just went online last month. And they are using GE gas turbines converted to like 60% hydrogen and generating, and eventually it's a prototype to be able to generate hydrogen for trucks and things like that. So there is actually a lot of experimentation, but the one of the fallacies that the industry puts out about that is that hydrogen may be clean, but the generation of hydrogen goes back to the same issue. If all you're doing is burning bunker C oil,
What?
then you're not doing anything.
You order pizza.
No,
Yeah,
it's
really.
really a donation.
But if you're splitting.
So,
But you have to have an energy source to split it.
I mean,
I mean, you know,
where it's, where
I didn't have the other.
Yeah,
wind
right.
power.
right, wind power, yeah. Well,
Water power or something.
yeah,
They can store that as hydrogen in there.
specifically wind power, like Texas. I mean, I hate to keep saying positive things about Texas, but Texas is actually the forefront here because they've got such large wind farms. And they generate at nighttime when there isn't the demand. So I think I mentioned before, Austin air conditioning is all off of ice, chill water. And the chill water is all frozen at nighttime from the wind farms in West Texas. They are also generating hydrogen at night off peak. So, but it's very regional. I mean, if you're in the middle of Iowa, that does not work.
Geography matters.
Yes.
But it would in North Dakota. Same thing as West Texas.
Yeah.
Grid problems.
All right, well, let's get back to what we're gonna recommend to the board going forward. You had it again.
Yeah,
These are just some ideas.
Can you define what a conservation support program is? What does that mean to BPW? I mean, what does that term mean?
Oh, in general, just these are policies and programs that would help either conserve energy or produce clean energy.
Okay, so you meant it in a general way, it didn't have some particular
No,
programmatic
no.
significance.
Is there anything on there that we shouldn't be? Like, Austin, anything on there that you think would be counterproductive? We talked about, electric vehicles and so forth, and it's a blessing, it's a problem at the same time. But I think we still should support it. Same thing with like, there's everything else on there.
Should there be any programs listed that aren't specific to electricity, but the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, planting of trees, whatever can be done? You think about the spray irrigation systems and all of that open fields could eat up a lot of carbon dioxide if we put some trees out there. It's not a huge. Pardon?
A big proponent of spray, but the land cost is worth it.
Right,
They pull it
Right,
up.
but you're saying where there are existing spray fields.
right.
Do they
Right
have
now,
trees or there?
right now, they're kind of using center pivot, so you can't plant trees there. But if you change to solid state irrigation, you could plant trees, have forests and take up.
That's what they're doing down at the existing piston plant here. They want to work next going to trees.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I have those poor operators having to take the oil out every winter and then put it back in on those center pivot wheels, you know, to. Gosh.
Building on Mark's. I'm a guilty user here of too much water my wife's lovely garden. Is there value in quoting landscaping, whatever, lower water demand landscaping?
That we peak out on irrigation. That's why it would have been beautiful if we had that purple pipe in the ground, but
There you go, purple pipe.
I tried
um,
that with our previous general manager, Ken Meekum. I think maybe I've said this week. I've met with them before I got on the board. And that's when they were just starting to develop off Bill's Neck Road, all that. And I talked to Townsend and Wingo, and they were in favor of taking it back. Ken wouldn't consider it.
I also think about it as use as fire flow too. Golly,
Yeah.
Having just one tank, like, you know,
we're working towards
makes me
that.
nervous.
Well, but back to the, given some of the other things you've got on here, Energy Star appliances, low flow plumbing fixtures. I don't know, maybe you already have something that goes out to the customers about water use and landscaping.
We do it in the summertime when it's
Water, July is water conservation month.
Right, I
So-
mean, my neck of the woods, every irrigation system in the neighborhood seems to kick on about 5 in the morning. on the
That's our
phone.
highest flow.
Yeah.
That's our highest flow is in the mornings between 5 AM and about 7:30 or 8 AM.
Well, I mean, two things. First of all, planting trees. And actually hardwood trees are the best for absorbing carbon dioxide. But that's really in the city's bailiwick. And, from we're tree city, but yet we still have a lot of tree lumbering, clear cutting of trees. But I think we really need to look to the city for that aspect. On the watering, the purple pipe, I mean, it's great in areas where you have droughts or you have water consumption. We actually have, it's a balance issue here. And I think as everyone knows, I mean, I put 1,000-gallon cistern in the ground where I collect all the rainwater from the roof, and I use that for my irrigation. And I think maybe we need to promote those type of things. And everyone talks about rain barrels, but it's a pittance, I mean, 55 gallons of water. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not substantially impacting our irrigation flow.
But a cistern goes in when you're building a house. It's not an easy thing to jam in a property that's already built. It's
Actually, depends upon the layout. I mean, because, a 1,000-gallon tank is a septic tank. And if you have room in the front and you just run the liters to it from the house. You're right, it's far easier.
Where's yours?
Right next to Charlie Malinowski, right in the front there.
Yeah.
Right. And,
The Nova's in it.
oh, well, actually, BPW knew it was there because when I was installing it, they stopped by and said, we have sewer systems.
Part of the reason I said stuff about the landscaping stuff is I just came back from Denver. I mean, they're at the extreme of, they're paying people to remove all their landscaping and put astroturf in the front yard. And, maybe we're not there, but my sense is, at some point, the demand is gonna get closer to exceeding the supply.
Oh, yeah. And I think more natives, planting, encouraging that is, I don't mean to belittle that, but, we are blessed with, having a fair amount of rain. It's not that we're, building, we're not planting cotton fields in the desert.
Would almost be like you would try and incentivize time of use too, because
Mhm.
instead of sprinkler in the 5 a.m. sprinkle at 12 a.m. and do it overnight or something along those lines. The other thing we don't have on here is no wipes and pipes.
Oh.
So, and just so you know, the federal government, I got it on in LinkedIn. It was the Environment Federation's post. And they say, ask your members of Congress to support the Wastewater Infrastructure Pollution Prevention and Environmental Safety Act, which is the WIPES Act.
Really?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
But just recently, BPW, ED got together in our initiative. And I was in a hospital with my wife. And all the restrooms, they have a sign, no wipes in the pipes. And cautions about using anything to clean the control. And it has BPW with BD on it. I think that
It's the word out.
took a while to get there, but
Yeah.
they really come around.
On the last bullet item on this list, under conservation support programs, mitigation guidance for homeowners, my sense is that the city mitigation committee may have some information that's relevant to that, and it's probably worthwhile coordinating that messaging.
Well, when we say the next thing between now and our next meeting, we'll be meeting with the city, hopefully, and discussing a lot of these issues. And if you have any specific questions or information that we should be asking, we're just discussing, let us know.
You know what I'd like to see is more, I mean, you're talking water conservation. I'm more focused on flooding in my comments on this and rain gardens, things like that. The city property, the BPW property, if there were some demonstration projects there.
Oh, we have that.
Oh, you do?
Canal Park, it's all rain gardens, the whole park.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It is. But I mean, okay. You got me there.
Well, but
But,
you didn't know that.
right,
There's value in
yeah.
more homeowners understanding out there.
There is a sign in one of the beds.
Yeah. Okay, and also expansion of wetlands for stormwater management, for dealing with floods. I mean, people are trying to build in wetlands, and what we need to do is increase the wetlands. And whether that's part of BPW's stormwater management or part of the city's.
Comes under regulations, building.
Yeah, right. But those are the kinds of things I thought were missing from here. And I also had the thing about cisterns.
And one other thing on the irrigation side is that, we probably could put out, and I'm sure there's literature out there of best practices, because spray irrigation is much, much less efficient than drip irrigation. And irrigation at noon during the day, I mean, whether it's at 5 or 12 at night is one thing, but, so timing and the type.
Well, yeah,
But having-
you don't want it irrigated at noon on a 90-degree day,
Right,
because the evaporation would be 75%.
that's right.
And you're not supposed to irrigate going into the evening either, so the plants stay wet. Get
Yeah.
fungus.
Fungus,
So that's why everybody recommends right before sun.
Yes.
That's,
Right.
It's about the health of the plants.
yeah.
But drip irrigation is also more efficient than, and it's actually better for the plants because it
Leaves don't
gets
get
deeper
wet.
into the ground and encourages deep root growth instead of surface.
But then the cisterns are good for both irrigation purposes and for stormwater management.
Yep.
All right, well, I put in, zero escaping of rain gardens, tree planting, the hardwoods, water conservation program, cisterns, the wipes and the pipes, anything else?
Undergrounding the most vulnerable areas. which should be a BPW policy when we've got the,
Well, we do have a policy that any new structure is gonna be underground.
right, but there may be existing areas that, you know, are constantly having problems that maybe BPW should think about underground.
Well, and it's interesting, the reports that are coming out of California, Florida. It's actually amazing. There were total communities that wound up with electricity. And surrounding areas that didn't. And there's actually a big push. And once again, I hate to say positive things about Florida, but Florida has actually been pushing for undergrounding utilities because of the prevalence of storms. And you can't build an electric system to Category 5 hurricanes.
Aerialized.
Aerial.
As I said, I saw, a grant going to one of the towns in Florida.
West Palm
underground,
Beach.
West Palm Beach. I'm sure they needed it.
Yes.
They got FEMA grants to underground the utilities.
Yeah.
They probably just had good political connections.
Just a few.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. They didn't say. All right, thank you.
Also, is there any consideration of incentives for conservation programs? To get homeowners to do these kinds of things?
Right, we talked back when we were several more of us were on planning, about basically, we talked about rain barrels and all these kinds of things, vis-a-vis impervious surface calculations. You put 1,000-gallon cistern in the ground, that's a different animal than a couple of rain barrels.
Yes.
It's 20.
Thank you. But you get my point. I mean, it's a more significant investment and might actually make a difference in a stormwater event. If enough of them were installed.
Right.
But that's not just a BPW thing. That's definitely within the city's bailiwick.
Question, could I ask a couple?
Sure, go ahead.
So I have a couple of things. Last summer, there were 4 different cases of fecal contamination in Rehoboth Beach in the ocean. And Denrec came down and did some testing, and they had high levels of E. coli and Enterococcus bacteria, and the city of Rehoboth reported it, and they put up signs, I guess, and that warning. And I'm just curious if there was anything like that happened in Lewes, maybe in the canal or on Lewes Beach. I mean, if it happened in Rehoboth, I'm assuming, which maybe is a bad assumption, that it probably happened in Lewes too. But
I don't know what
there was nothing that was ever publicly reported in Lewes, but it was reported 4 different times in Rehoboth.
Do you have a beaches
I don't know.
monitoring program here?
I would assume,
I'm just curious.
I would assume.
Not that I'm.
Well,
I think
wasn't
Denver.
the issue in Rehoboth, the stormwater retention at the end of Rehoboth Avenue? Because they did genetic testing. It wasn't human,
Yeah.
it was animal, and it was,
I mean, I don't know.
everything drains on Rehoboth,
Right.
and there was a
They're straight out of
sand
it.
filter. Well, there's a sand filter, and the sand filter wasn't being maintained. That was, I don't remember.
I think it overcame that sand filter. I think it overcame the sand.
Right.
filter.
But I think the sand filter was clogged, it hadn't been maintained. That was my recollection of the Rehoboth event. And
Like,
the
that's
one
the
that,
same situation here at all.
yeah, and the one that happened a couple of years ago up here also wound up being non-point source. It was animal-based runoff from the fields just north.
Like Slaughter Beach.
Yeah,
So the other couple other things I wanted to mention. I did a projection and forecast. There was a meeting last night. I think some of you were at the meeting last night with Mayor Andrew Williams and County Councilman Mark Schaefer. And it was from the Greater Lewes Civic Coalition, which appeared to be an anti-development group. I'm not sure, but I think that was the general consensus of that meeting. And Mark Schaefer during that meeting said, well, we really can't stop development. It's constitutional right for a farmer to sell his land, to a developer to develop, to build it. There's no way to really stop it. And I think he's right. I mean, how do you stop it? The only way I've ever seen development ceased or curtailed was through a moratorium. And that happened in Lewes about 20 plus years ago, when we had a problem at the wastewater treatment facility, when we were operating above capacity and they shut it down and the plant had to be doubled in size. So my forecast and my projection analysis, which I think some of you have, I know Tom, I gave you one, I don't know if anybody else has it, but it was a 5-year projection based on the volume of effluent from the wastewater treatment plant and the increased development in the BPW community, the service area for the wastewater treatment plant. And I did a 5-year projection beyond that, but what I'm doing now is I'm trying to update that to include, it was 2015 to 2019. I want to include 2020 and 2021 and maybe 2022. And I don't know if that daily data is available, if it's readily available or not.
As far as flows,
The daily flow.
well, on our wastewater treatment plant reports, which are posted monthly, like the one that's gonna be posted for the next board meeting, has average daily flow. So you can utilize that. It has all the nitrates, the phosphorus, all that.
Right. Just I can find that online.
Yep, you can buy every month.
Okay, and so back to that point, I'm confused about what average daily flow is. I've asked that question before. Because, and I don't know if this is standard operating procedure to average the daily flows over a period of time. How else do you get a daily average if you don't average it over a period of time? But that's a question.
Well, when you're talking about, like, if you're running an average daily flow of 1 million gallons, you could have days where you're 1.3, you could have days where you're 800,000 gallons and it just averages out.
But what do you average? Is it a period of time? Is it a 7-day average, rolling 7-day average?
I believe
or is it
they run-
rolling 30-day average?
I believe it's 30
How do you get a
days.
daily average?
I believe it's 30 days.
30-day rolling average.
Yeah.
So during that 30-day period, and this is my point of contention, is that during the summer especially, that the daily flow, not the average, but the daily flow at the plant could be well above capacity. Is that correct?
The highs and lows are important.
So I'm talking about on a busy summer.
Yeah,
Daily.
the highs and lows of each day are listed. So that's.
In the report, yeah.
The daily maxima and minima are reported.
So that's all, that information's all there.
Yeah, what I'm saying was that if you use the daily average, it's over 30 days. But if you have a 1-day flow and you measure the 1 day that it flowed, not the 30-day average, and it's well above capacity,
That's on there.
that's, pardon me?
That's
I'm
on the
telling you,
report.
that's on there.
And our NRPDS permit has average daily and it has max.
I'm not sure it has average daily on the report, because I looked at that after we had our meeting previously. I don't think it says average daily report. I don't think so, but I'll double check that.
I don't have this month's copy with me, but
Okay.
There's a lot of information on that, the flow things in this report.
Yeah, I got
So you might be able to take notes.
But so I guess my point, the final question is, are we continuing to annex more property and service more homes as the community, the BPW community? If we annex this and annex that and continue to develop within the BPW territory, the volume of sewage is going to increase dramatically over time. And is the plant prepared? I mean, I don't know. I mean, hopefully they are, but if not, that's what I worry about.
I think, Nick, you'll find in this report here, because it's forecasting out to 2030
Okay, good.
or to 2050.
You're talking about the long range plan?
Yeah, the long plan. I think if you look at that, it does take that into account, because we had to make sure that if we were building a new plant or we're hardening, that we were comparing apples to apples. So it's in there, and you'll see capital costs, operating costs, everything for each of the options. And there's a lot of data.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the school system, because the Cape Henlopen High School, when they first came to school, they didn't build it, they didn't really project forward, and then the number of students is, almost doubled in the last 20 years. So I just worry about that. But the last thing is that I really believe that the wastewater treatment plant is in a bad location. With sea level rise and the intensity of storms continuing to go up, is that in there also?
That's
Okay,
that's all
all
I
right,
have.
then I'm beating the dead horse.
Yeah, it's projected, you know, rise is gonna be.
It needs to get.
It's not a surprise that they put the wastewater treatment plant at the lowest point in the town. Right.
It's in a bad location.
It's in.
You sound like an engineer.
And the last thing,
I'm working in as an engineer, it should close down. So that's.
I took the shit dirt and water.
Aaron's on here capturing every one of these words.
Yeah, really.
last thing is the cost of land, if we were moved to move the wastewater treatment plant to the west side of the canal. The land cost seems to keep being this stumbling block that we're all having, you know, it's too expensive to buy land, but the state owns a lot of land on the west side of the canal.
Okay,
Not
and
that far.
that's not in the report.
Pardon me?
And land cost is not in the report.
It isn't.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But then you have to evaluate the
It's in
cost,
the-
the cost
in
of
the
land and the
calculation.
moving the plant versus the, what happens if you don't. That's, I think.
That
that's a really-
that should be in there.
Yeah.
That's a risk, you know, analysis that you need to really think about. Like, if we have a disaster here, we haven't been hit by a hurricane since 1954, Hurricane Hazel. And I was on the beach when it happened. And then since then, we had the 62 storm. We had a 9.5 foot tidal surge. We have not had a hurricane since 1954. Well, if and when it comes, the plant's in a bad location.
One of the things you'll see is that when that presentation is had, it's the hardening of the existing facility. You know, you talk a lot about how you harden the facility itself. And it goes into much detail on what those improvements look like. But there is a second piece to that, which is access to the facility, which is then discussed, which is, that goes kind of where, you know, you can build as, you can harden it as much as you want, but you still have to be able to get there. And then
Right.
that involves coming over two different jurisdictions of roads. One is either the Delaware River Bay Authority,
Right.
the other one is Delcott.
But you'll have Earl's boat.
Yeah, well,
We didn't think about.
You can borrow my duck. Thank you.
I had a lot of good questions.
Yeah, thank you for letting me.
I'm sure you'll read it.
Yeah, I'll read it.
I got a question basically for the press, Tom, which is, so we came up with 120 miles an hour and whatever that was,
Wind speed.
and 11.64 feet. Is the board ever gonna address that, or is that just,
Well, that's,
I mean, are you gonna adopt some resolution? that
we're gonna
says that?
provide all this to the board. Soon to have them. You know, bless what we've come up with, if they're aware of it. And so, yeah, that'll happen. And that's also, of course, in this report for the treatment plan. So I think so, you know, yes, that's happened.
But at some point, if you adopt it the way I guess we envisioned it, the 11.64 will get revised at, you know, whatever.
Well, that's supposed to go to 2050. That's
By 20.
projection.
It'll get revised at 2040.
Yeah, well, about 2030.
And become more or less a benchmark that's worthwhile.
Well, and you know, some of this is us being proactive because FEMA eventually needs to get their act together and update the
Blood notes.
flood maps and the projections. And,
That's why.
you know, so when those get updated, then
They don't update projections. They don't work on projections. They work on historical evaluations of storms that happened in the past. They do not do projections. That's,
yes, but FEMA is supposedly being pushed
oh, okay.
to
That'd be great.
at least do things like, and you know, what I've talked to, is they're either going to go to waiting. So that they wait the last 5 years more than the prior ones. Or adopt into it projection numbers into it, but what FEMA Philadelphia has told me is that, but nothing's gonna happen for 5 years. It's gonna take 5 years to get through the political mores of that. But they are aware because basically a lot of communities, coastal communities, are doing it on their own. And there's not necessarily consistency.
What's it?
I think that's more for Austin.
Yeah, Tom and I are meeting with them on Thursday.
Oh,
Yeah, I think that's what he's, yeah.
so you have an answer.
Mhm.
Just to this general point that Bob's making, and you're talking about here, I attended a presentation by the lead author of the state's sea level rise, work group. The guys that we relied on when we set the numbers early on. He made a presentation within the university and I happened to be able to zoom in and listen to it. And he made some comment in there about FEMA and the way they did things versus the way they were doing their science-based prediction, looking at, ice melting and warming of oceans, volumetric increases and so on and so on and so on. It's technical stuff. I actually asked a question at the end. I said, I think I heard you just say, we need to be careful how we use FEMA. And he said, we don't use FEMA at the state level. I said, but at the municipal level, we rely pretty heavily on FEMA floodplain numbers. We just saw it up here. He said, well, I think there's value in seeing where we can do better as a municipality. I don't think we just simply take whatever, FEMA sends us. If it doesn't work for us,
Well, and that's why the numbers that are in this report here don't.
I'm curious about the comment about state-owned land on the other side of the canal.
Well, the report, the consultants were given an area. What was the distance from the center of town?
I think it was actually 5 miles.
5 miles radius to look at land.
What's good?
So they went out and looked at all the available land that's out there, privately owned, whatever.
But not state owned.
Yeah, I think it was everything.
They did look at state owned property too,
More than
or
that.
just private property?
I don't think they. I don't think land.
But it was,
I can clarify that, but that was the thing. We're not identifying the properties because we know the purpose of the land. We didn't want to, we said generically here, but they actually looked at properties that might fit the need.
Right.
The biggest one was the split irrigation option, which makes the most sense, several hundred acres.
but they did a very high level screening also because it had to be greater than X feet from groundwater. I mean, there were criteria that would make the land usable or not. Because there's a lot of state land, but it's marsh. Right?
Well, I was thinking about the West Cuts Corner property of 40+ acres and then that 5-acre parcel in the corner that you have next to the wellhead. I mean, that's the Board of Public Works on that. don't
I
they?
need a couple things with the city and
Yeah.
the county.
Solar farms.
I built purple water pipes.
A couple hundred acres. So.
Kind of one last question. Is the Board of Public Works in favor of further annexation and acquiring more wastewater customers? Or is there a point where you say, okay, we're not going to annex?
That's a city issue.
That is a city issue?
We don't have no.
That was part of the dispute, I think.
I know, the city
Okay,
approves us, we'll serve it, if the city doesn't.
We are a utility.
yeah, I
We
get it.
provide service
I get it.
to,
We have a sewer service territory, which you can go and the maps are delineated and were created, God knows how long ago. But even with our agreement with Sussex County, the flow agreement, there are areas that allow for people that are within our service territory to actually have the infrastructure, which would be owned by the Board of Public Works, but actually be treated by the county.
Not like Gills Neck Road.
Yeah, well,
There's about
there's,
2,500 homes out there.
yeah, well, they're not our customers.
Yeah.
You have the
They're all your
potential.
customers, right?
No,
We are.
for water, for
For water,
sewer,
but not for sewer.
yeah.
But some of that sewage comes to Lewis though, if I'm not. mistaken.
through the flow agreement, but that can be shut off at any time.
That's, we didn't.
You can switch it either
We
way.
can cancel that anytime.
Yeah.
If we're getting near capacity or not.
Well, thank you.
All
Thank you very
right,
much.
thanks for coming, man.
Yep.
Thank
And if you can make it tonight.
You know, I've
you'll be-
tried, but
You'll be hearing the consultants present.
Yeah, no.
That's the workshop,
It'd be online.
we'll be doing all that again.
I gotta toss up between my daughter's basketball
Oh,
game and listening to.
Well, well, they when we announce the date of the basketball game, which are there.
Oh, yeah. well,
All right, thank you.
On your website, where do I find that?
The Infomark report,
Yeah,
if you go onto each one of our, board meeting agendas.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
The regular board
Okay.
meetings.
Thank you.
Question
Okay,
about-
it's not a separate tab. Got it.
A question about that, report, maybe related to what she's saying, what he was asking, what's the minimum time for which they measure those things that they. report on?
I'll have to double check, because I want to make sure that I understand it correct. I went on there and it has every day. It has every day, all the way down, and then it shows the min and the, shows the min and the max over the course of 30
Right,
days.
because it would get at some of the questions, you know.
But you're using the SCADA system, so. it's-
Correct.
mean,
I have a-
it's every 6 seconds.
But that's the whole reason why we have an EQ tank also, is so when peak flows come, the tank gets filled.
Right.
And then you, at nighttime, you even the flow throughout the plant.
Especially during rain events, they'll bring that headroom, they'll draw down to give you more headroom, so that if you have these large rain events where you get 3 or 4 inches of rain, it allows you, because, there's I and I, there's no way around that, and that allows for that. That excess that you would see, the excess of flow, but then again, you also have the old clarifying tank, which isn't nearly as big, but
All right, the last item is, identify potential future topics for mitigation. And I've asked this a couple of times, and so far, I think. haven't come up with any. Yes, Mark.
I know I failed to keep myself happy if I don't restate my concerns that I don't see in this report about water coming into the system during flooding. We can have a hardened system, we can put mountains around it, and we'll be pumping seawater into it. And I really think that ought to be addressed in some way in this report. Also, I notice in the cost estimates, they don't put a decrease in cost for the value of the existing site being sold off, for instance. Is there any?
Well, that's gonna be an interesting thing. I mean, that's. How many acres is it?
currently, as it stands, it's one single parcel.
Yeah.
But through the MOU, it's going to be subdivided out. I believe it's between 7 and 8.
Yeah.
Am I right on that one, Robin? Am I close?
I just didn't see anything in this report saying that there should be a negative if the site is moved.
Wastewater treatment.
Would you sell it or would you keep it as a park?
We're gonna build condos.
Yeah.
Did you just see my estimate?
I don't know, the brownfield. It used to be the city dump. Back in the day.
Single family homes.
It used to be the city dump. Yeah.
That's the old day.
I mean, that's, so the thing with the report was we had no way of being able to evaluate, and that's why there's that open line that, once we choose options, then more detail would go into, because if we decide to move the facility someplace else, then you have to enter into, geological studies and so on. And, if we're gonna abandon the property, that would be, but that also has to be done jointly with the city, so.
And Hazel Brittingham tells the story about going to the city dump with her dad when she was a child to look at the old cars and stuff.
Well, there's some of it on,
Same, yeah.
some dumping. The new walkway going to, the railroad bridge was that.
Yeah.
That spur that goes up. There's stuff in that woods back
There
there.
is.
Was part of the dump, as I
Yeah.
understand it.
So it wasn't a pristine
But we
piece of
haven't,
land
we haven't run
when it
into,
was determined to be.
we haven't run into any trash or anything.
Not yet.
Around.
No,
it.
not
So
yet,
evidently it was removed.
So that that considerably changes the economic
Value,
value,
Yeah.
the positives of releasing the
but
property.
you don't know what you're dealing with.
Well, yeah,
It's
so
environmental
it's,
remediation.
Right, we're talking, if it's Hazel's father and whatever preceded him, we're talking
Those
very
days
few
they used to
environmental regulations.
Think that the ground would absorb the bad stuff and it would all be fine.
Yes.
Having spent many years at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Oak Ridge Complex.
There's nothing underneath that site.
There's nothing there, no, of course not, but that was the heritage that came to my mind when Hazel was telling me the story, so.
To Mark's question, if I understand what you were just saying, you'd be remiss if you didn't say. Some of that happens regardless of what happens with the treatment plant. You're talking about the, I guess,
Well,
you were what you call it I in the system, right?
Yeah, well,
That's gonna happen regardless of where the treatment plant is.
that's correct. If you put it out,
Infiltration and inflow. Infiltration into the pipes, inflow into the manholes.
Stuff that leaks in.
leaks.
No water getting into the place that you don't want.
I is certainly a problem in all sewage treatment systems. However, a flood situation is different in my estimation here. We're going to have shower drains and toilets covered with seawater. We're gonna have perfectly operating pump stations and a brand new treatment plant with great big lagoons, let's say. And it's gonna, those pump stations are gonna be pumping seawater. And through these nice new lagoons, and then we'll fill them up in about a day, which should take 30 days. And I mean, I really think it is not being addressed.
How do you address that? When you have
Wow.
so much of the
That's
service
not my
area.
department, I'm sorry.
But just, I mean, seriously,
Take care of
how
that, will you?
do you address that problem? I mean, is it a matter of just simply elevating all those fixtures to some minimum level?
Well, similar to the way you're doing it with pump stations. Or you add equipment at these lower houses that isolate them during a flood in some,
So like backflow type.
some sort of check valve of some sort, however that. could be.
Mark is talking about not a backflow to keep sewage from pushing back up into the toilet, but
The other
back
direction.
system,
actually
check valve.
a float goes up, closes the house off from the sewage treatment.
In fact, that's a way of doing it. Of course, all mechanical systems are subject to failure, so you need to, it's.
And that's a
just
lot,
think-
that's a lot of points.
I don't have an answer, I just have. a
I guess,
problem.
I was just gonna say, it comes down to almost like a policy question, because at that point in time, if you have water that is inside houses that's high enough to get into toilets and floor drains a little bit different, but if it gets into toilets and fixtures like that, at what point in time are you shunning that portion of the system completely down? Similar to what they did in Florida,
Right.
because
You-
at that
By
point,
turning off the pump station,
Yeah.
for instance.
That
And that may
pump
be the
station
answer
power.
that you do, because there's not wastewater being produced at that time, everybody's split
Well,
down.
do we have to let you indicate, maybe Robin, you
Yeah.
address this, but. I mean, there's some old facilities, homes and things like that, that might have toilets low enough. Is that, have you seen that as a big problem for floor drains? Or older homes?
Well, again, down the beach area, you got a lot of. Yeah, older homes in there that are actually the cars are parked
A lot of that,
below, yeah,
like
underground, yeah, the
Yeah.
grade.
But
So there's floor drains in there. Now, where the floor drains are hooked is, you'd have to check those out. The newer regulations don't allow for basements and stuff below the floodplain and things like that, like toilets and sinks and showers.
yeah.
So, but there are probably a lot of them in the older homes along the beach that do have bathrooms, do have showers, that are at ground level, that's just below the
We've
flood.
obviously,
We're talking about 7 feet or.
well, we've obviously had, water up to 6 feet. But, I mean, above, just 6 feet elevation. Where those lower areas have flooded. And many manholes that aren't tight or overflow. and the system's always responded, we generated itself in a period of
And
time.
these are these, I've been, I haven't lived here long enough to know, when you had that flood, did it go into houses and flood bathrooms and
Well,
et cetera, you know?
anything like my house is elevation 4. Of course, I'm up, but
Yeah,
if you're closer to the bay, it's higher, and most of the ones with cellars on there are up there along the
I can personally attest to a couple of houses from a storm back in November of '09 that had water bobbing around in that below grade level. You know, whether it was a garage or it had been turned into a basement bedroom or something like that, but
yeah.
it was completely feasible that the situation you're describing was happening there. You know, a toilet.
As I drive,
Humanity.
I drive out Cedar.
Yeah.
And I see some of the smaller houses along the road that have been there for a long, long time.
Right.
That are at grade, not the ones that are built up, and we're talking about a 7-foot to 9-foot sea level rise concern. Those houses are gonna have water up to their windows, and you know that water is gonna be pouring into the sewer system.
But
Can
and
you-
not to keep beating a dead horse. But this falls under the bailiwick of the city and the city mitigation team. And the city mitigation team working to do something with the building codes to address exactly those concerns, which is what we tried to do and got squelched. So it's outside planning and zoning. Had tried to do. And because being proactive and all of the concerns you raised are exactly what we had. You know, the issue is a shower on the first floor of a house built in the 1950s that's in the floodplain, has no protection whatsoever, let alone the value of the house, but the infrastructure of the system. And there is nothing that was proposed by the mitigation, the
Executive Committee on Resiliency, whatever that's called. What's that committee called?
Yeah.
the
Executive.
executive committee. That addresses any of that.
Okay, but
I just, I
Sorry,
see
Steve.
$25 million
Yeah.
and it'll fail because the water will overcome it. If everything is left.
to support your point. I think what Mark is saying is BPW needs a way to shut things down. Can you shut down the beach? And you need a defined plan to say, at this point, we are no longer going to pump any sewage from the beach. Or
Well, it's zones, right?
Pilot
You
or
can,
zones or whatever.
you could set up, if I understand what you're saying,
but you shouldn't be doing that on the fly. You
No,
should be
You're
saying,
absolutely right. And one of
check
things we've talked about is updating our emergency plans so that we.
shut this one off, shut
I don't
three,
particularly,
and we tell the people that that's gonna happen.
so some of that can come, seems to me, from this.
Yeah,
From,
absolutely.
from when you get the elevations on this, you'll have the ability to imagine placing valves or whatever to shut, just those most vulnerable areas
What if it
down.
goes into the emergency plan?
Yeah.
There's a stepwise procedure.
But
To Mark's point though, 3 feet of water at Press's house,
There's not 3 feet or something.
well, it's gonna be in drains, it's gonna be in floor drains, it's gonna be pumping as fast as it can to the wastewater treatment plant, and pretty soon you've got salt water.
so I agree.
And our
that-
buggies aren't gonna be happy.
I agree that some of the challenges on the city and its process planning zoning. But I think the other place where it could be, because BPW ends up holding the bag every time that water gets in there, right?
in the very least, it needs to be in that conservation policy list that we just were looking at, right?
Well,
For those older homes, here are some things that you need to keep in
the
mind.
first thing we gotta do is to tighten our sewer system.
Yeah.
Particularly on the beach side. So, and there's a lot of new stuff out there. We just got that Cedar Avenue. Route that it's in our long range plan.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's a hell of a project,
Yeah,
but
it's a big, what, $16 million project, something like that,
yeah, for water and sewer.
to clean up all the side streets between Bay and Cedar.
But in there, could you imagine setting up some way to shut off that piece if you ever had to?
You just shut the pump station off.
Shut the pump
Shut,
station,
shut 8 down here. Whole beach side's done.
right?
Since you wouldn't be producing, I think that's a valid way of doing it, because you wouldn't be producing wastewater. Everybody would be out of it.
Yeah.
Well, and
If the flood was that high.
And we've
One can hope.
talked about putting a more robust SCADA system on the individual pump stations as well. We use a cell system now that calculates flow based off runtime, and when we update any new pump stations that go in, we put flow meters so that we can also see flow, because some of the older stations you can't. You can base it off of runtime and kind of do your math backwards,
Right.
but
If
Those
the
are-
impellers are right and all the pumps. are-
Yeah.
Is there a way of putting like a conductivity measurement unit in there to get at the saltwater influx? Something that would allow you to sort of prevent, you'd be able to shut off.
I think you would know it, and I think it was that bad.
you know it based on
Pretty
flow.
much- You pretty much know.
You can see it on flow, you'd be able to tell.
I think regular standard wastewater is pretty conductive to electric. So I don't know,
You couldn't, you
it's
couldn't.
not my
sort out the-
background to know, but whether it's.
You couldn't put it on saltwater.
Saltwater.
Okay.
Or if
Here's
it's a
my
big enough
background,
difference.
and plain old distilled water will give you a magnetic measurement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Our next move will be to put this together. We should put Austin, this on the agenda for on our next board meeting. So we were gonna get together on Tuesday about the agenda. We should put this on the.
You mean
agenda.
for January's,
No. for
December's?
December, November, the next meeting, just to bring the board up to where we are right now.
Yeah,
Just so
yes.
this- before we
The
go.
agenda's already shown.
I'm gonna post it today.
We're gonna talk about it on Tuesday.
No, we're going through our normal monthly, going through the agenda. One-on-one, board member wise.
Yeah, today
The
is
items on
7
the
days,
agenda.
we're 7 days out, so the agenda's gotta be posted today.
You're right.
But if you
Okay.
just want to update, you can do it
Under the-
under your secretary's
Yeah.
report.
I'll do
But,
that.
and that way, because you're not gonna make
That-
any motion or
that's
anything
fine.
like that.
I'll just do it on the second.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I just, the agenda, as I remember, has got a fair amount on it. So,
Okay.
you know, for any detailed discussion, I think we probably need to do it.
I'll just do it quicker and more completely.
Yeah. That's great.
No, I won't be here for January.
Yeah, I think you're here for January. You
I'm
leave,
leaving the 24th.
It's gonna be on the 28th. No, I lied, hold on, I'm sorry. It's gonna be on the 25th.
sounds like you're leaving a little later.
But you have that approved by the board president.
Yeah.
The board president doesn't remember that.
I mentioned it before, but
Yes, you did, I know. It's actually in my calendar. Yeah, the board meeting is the 25th
Of December.
of January.
January.
Yeah. Yes.
Combine the board meetings.
5 o'clock in the morning.
My name is Panetowitz. What are you talking about?
Oh, we can work that out.
Russ, to your question, I realize you want to talk, but to your question of, you know, what next, what else? Maybe my memory is just too short today because I'm still trying to catch up with flying.
have we covered the stormwater thing? It relates to what Mark was just going through. Have we covered the, you know, the situations where we're gonna have more water? We've talked a lot about flooding. And we talked a little bit about stormwater, but are there other things we need to be thinking about more specifically with stormwater?
Well, because, I mean, the other aspect is, besides coastal flooding or tidal flooding, is rain events.
Right, that's what I'm getting at right now.
And, you know, we've seen, and we've talked about before, massive rain events, so.
But you're gonna be, you've already had major rain events, obviously, in the past. It'll be more frequent. And more furious.
I guess one of the things that I would say, and comes from this conversation we've had about what's the city responsibility and what's the BPW responsibility, is that the general trend, at least my layman observation is that when those 50-year-old, or so that you said that 50-year-old bungalows that are at grade are bought today, they rarely, if ever, stay as 50-year-old bungalows.
Yeah.
First thing that happens is they get run over by a bulldozer and dumpstered, and then up goes the big thing that goes to the building envelope. That has impervious surface implications for the way the runoff curve works. And then when you start doing it block, parcel by parcel, block by block, it fundamentally changes and exacerbate the flooding that's coming up from the bay and so on.
Yeah, but I think that's not great compared to sea level rise. Flooding from the bay. I mean, bay flooding is really, we can have huge storms and there's nothing's flooded. I mean, as far as like basements, stuff like that. Or like my lower level doesn't flood from rainstorms. It's always after canal rises.
Right, so maybe I haven't said this before, but as the sea level rises, the groundwater underneath the lowest elevations in the area will rise, and it will ultimately stay risen, so that it effectively can accommodate less stormwater.
Right.
So although it may not be a problem now, eventually it will become a bigger and bigger problem, even if the stormwater generation were to stay the same, it's gonna show up more and become more of a bigger problem. So,
Well, and the other aspect is that how much of it has been pure luck. I mean, if you look at this last year's worth of storms, the rainfall amounts have varied over 5 miles drastically.
Yeah.
And we actually lucked out in that we didn't have the worst of the drought and we didn't have the worst of the rain
Right.
events. When, if you just went inland, I mean, there were lots of 5 and 6 inch,
Yeah.
4-hour storm events. And that's
Well,
the
yeah, I guess-
toss of the die. I mean, it's,
Well, we're gonna be doing this city, beach side, storm study.
Right.
With the city. Is that started yet, Austin?
I believe it has.
EMD's going to have, that's gonna address storms. Keep talking about. We still, I think what we have to do is tighten our system. We can't control what's in people's basements. We didn't tell the city about it. And that's a building code type thing. But we have to make sure that our sewers are as tight as they can be and able to seal that type of thing.
So we did,
That's,
just by way of an example, so when we were getting ready, because most of the engineering work was done for the Cedar Avenue project. But we took a step back to kind of holistically look at that from a stormwater from the entire kind of corridor all the way out there. And then you talk about Delta, which is a whole nother ballgame. One of the things we did is we had that whole line cambered for the sewer. And any areas that were questionable were repaired. And one of the things we look at from a cost initiative is that even though you have old clay pipe, if you line it, there's benefit to it, but then also when it makes sense, if you're tearing up the road anyway to replace, then you replace it. So we're trying to do as much as what we can, and we have that camera that we use from stormwater pipe to sewer main. So that's one of the first things we do whenever we look at a project is we always camera to see what it looks like.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not. At this moment, the comments I just made aren't about sort of the infiltration side of things.
Your own.
I'm just thinking loading, just the amount of water that's sitting on the landscape that's trying to find a way to the sea. And if it can't go through a pipe, wherever that pipe may be, it's gonna try to find its way into the ground, and if the ground is full, then it's just gonna sit there.
And we know, good, with terracotta pipe, we have bad connections. It's not sealed real well, so if the groundwater rises, we're gonna have more of that. But hopefully, over the next several years, it'll all be PVC. The manholes will be resealed. That's the big project we have working on. That's.
Are you gonna go up to the property lines with the laterals also in that project?
For the Cedar
Yeah.
project. It's one of those that we're up for discussion. It's kind of what we did for Pilot Town Road, because some section of Pilot Town Road was clay, some of it was PVC. In that case, we replaced all the laterals, or we lined the laterals if they were existing.
That you get so much I through laterals.
Most of the cul-de-sacs off of Cedar are relatively new.
Yeah.
There's a couple like Lewes and I can't remember the other streets. But most of them are new, so they're all PVC pipes with cast manholes sealed. Also,
The toughest part out there is if you have to replace or repair anything, it's. You almost gotta bring a bigger outfit in just because you can't keep up with it. That sewer's fairly deep. I mean, we were out there when they were trying to put that lateral in.
You mean with water, with
No,
managing
sewer. Yes,
managing groundwater?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's like the Donovan's thing, but worse.
No, the Cedar is a whole different animal. Donovan's, you were 20 feet down. I think Cedar's more around the 9, 10, 11 feet.
Okay,
But even at 9, 10, or 11 feet, your water table is,
right there.
we've seen it to where right underneath that cedar, there was, and I think I told you this. There was one stone that was out of place. It's almost like a French drain. If you look at a side profile, one stone that was out of place, and it was like a fountain. It just came out just like a fountain.
yeah, Nick.
Water table or seafood.
That he said,
Very high,
you look at the flows that we had
depending on.
20 years ago, and there's the same flows we have now. And we've added a lot more to it. How can that be? Yes, we've tightened up the sewer system. We put, it's in general, low flow toilets and things, shower heads.
Yeah.
So water usage is way down, infiltration is way down, inflow is way down. So we never quite understood that.
Lots of changes that.
Oh, yeah, it's much tighter it is
Yeah.
today than it was
Yeah.
20 years ago.
But that thing that Austin just talked about, that's what I'm worried about, is that problem that you just described is only going to get worse as decades progress.
Well, I understand your concerns and they're real. We have,
I just hate to see
but
all
we have,
this money spent and it being hammered by, but a control system of the pump stations may be the answer,
yeah,
because it's hard to get every other.
so
spot
I think back,
right up.
there was one storm. It's probably 10 or more years, I forget which one it was, but the surge tank overflowed. And we actually had, that's how much I we had it,
Mm.
but that wasn't enough as far as I knew to knock the treatment plant. I don't, proper operation, I don't know, I didn't check, but it probably reduced the treatment.
It may not have been salt water
Yeah.
either. It may have been I from freshwater, rain and groundwater.
Well, again, I don't think most of our major flooding has to do with rain. I mean, yeah, it's gonna increase it, but I mean, to get major flooding, like 2 feet of water in my lower area, which I've had twice, that's always from the canal.
Yeah.
I've never had a rainstorm, come up our cul-de-sac and into the house. It's always been flooded down.
No, but they say that it's occurring similar at the same time.
All right, well, anything else? Let's schedule our next meeting.
So in Florida, you're gonna have a big enough meeting for all of us?
How about the pool? Oh, yeah. How's that?
I'll bring the shot.
Um, We want to do it early January.
I would say mid-January,
Mid-January,
gives staff a little bit more time.
okay. You loading? Yeah. Is that okay? 9:30 on the 11th, is everybody clear? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?